Thank you very much. As Thibaut said, I wanted to give this talk 2 years ago. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it. But I haven't given this talk anywhere else in the interim because really Paris is the only place to tell a love story. And like all love stories, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. This is me before I shaved off the moustache. The reason I want to talk about food to begin with is because over the last 2 or 3 years I've been doing a diet on and off called the Whole30. It's like limiting what you eat to meat, vegetables, nuts, eggs, and some fruit. So my fridge looks like this. Only joking, I'm a software developer. It looks like this. Now, at university, I had a very good friend. He was a sous chef at a Michelin star restaurant in St Andrews in Scotland, where I was. He was also a fellow student. We used to eat his meals and talk theology until the small hours of the morning. And he came to cook at my house for the first time at university, and he was looking around the kitchen. He was like, "Philip, where's your chef's knife? You haven't got a chef's knife. Get me a chef's knife. I won't cook without a chef's knife." I mean, he wasn't quite like that. But the first thing I did, I got the message, I went out, and I got a chef's knife. So as I said, for this diet, I eat a lot of this stuff. It requires a lot of preparation because you want to go from this to something like that. But the thing is, when you're standing in the kitchen every day, you've chopped up the first carrot, and you move it out of the way, and you still feel like there's a lot of stuff to chop. So I did what any self-respecting software developer would do. I went on the search for automation. And immediately searching for vegetable choppers, browsing through vegetable choppers and more vegetable choppers, reading all the reviews, figuring out, what's the best quality vegetable chopper, what can it do for me, what are the things that, the plastic ones break, is there one which doesn't do plastic, oh, this is only available in America, everything else. But in the end, I found the alligator from Sweden. And it helps me to do this in no time flat. So instead of preparing food every day for 15 minutes, I prepare food one day in the week for half an hour, and I've got the food for the week. When I'm not chopping vegetables, I am the VP of Engineering at Club Collect. I lead a small team. We do Rails and Phoenix. We're a remote team, and we are a CAM department trying to become a CAM company. And as you can see, I'm originally from the UK in Northern Ireland and have made my way slowly to the European mainland and now live in the Netherlands. And as Thibaut said, this is a journey. This is the story of my journey from Rails to the front end with Ember.js to the Elm programming language and then back to Ruby again. So let's start with Rails. I've just put in the line of code count. It's not very accurate. I'm sure people could quibble about one line of code here or there. But, Rails is amazing, right? A lot of us are Rails developers. Whenever we first started using Rails, we felt like wizards. We could accomplish so much. It gave us a lot of joy. We created a lot. And really, Rails at the beginning, it looks like this. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. And we can accomplish a lot. Whenever we become more experienced in the framework, I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes when working with the framework, I put my fork in the bowl and I try to do one particular thing. And instead of picking up one small bit of spaghetti that fits in my mouth, I've got a whole handful, a whole mouthful. And I want to give just one example. I'm sure that you also have examples that you will recognize from your own experiences. Once I had to use accepts nested attributes to do something like Google plus circles back then. I mean, now we have WhatsApp groups. And the difficulty was we decided to use Redis to store the friendship data because Redis sets are amazing. And so we had to hook up something non-standard, Redis, along with accepts nested attributes form. And we had checkboxes in there, which, you don't know these things as a young developer. You're kind of like, okay, it should work. I read the documentation. I do what the documentation says. And then you spend the next week wondering where on earth all your time has gone and why on earth it's not working. I mean, in this particular case, it's due to Rails using checkboxes. When checkboxes aren't checked, nothing goes to the server. You've got to do that manually. trying to hook up Active Record to a separate database system. Like using the framework works whenever it's on the happy path, but sometimes can be challenging whenever you step off the path. I could have talked about autoloading. I could have talked about Active Record in general. I could have talked about other things. And really, the way I see frameworks is you have buckets to put your code in. It helps you to arrange your code. It helps you not to think. It helps you to get to a place where you implicitly understand whenever you got a feature how to break things down and how to arrange your code. And the decisions are all taken for you, right? You don't really have to think too much. And so, full of frameworks and on the JavaScript bandwagon, wanting more functionality and features in the browser, I went to the Ruby on Rails of the front-end world. This was billed as the convention over configuration framework to rival what Rails was in the back end and to bring it to the front end. Again, code count, you can quibble, but it's in the region of 200,000 lines of code. And, Ember's great, right? You've got LinkedIn, you've got Intercom, you've got the Heroku dashboard, which many of us may be familiar with, and it works, right? And this is the promise, you're the Tomster at the front, with a heart above your head, you love it, and then there's a hamster in the background, the framework doing all the work for you. Except I was the one who felt like the hamster, and Ember was smiling at my fate. The reason is because Ember is a framework that is constantly in development. That's one of its strongest points, but also if you're a smaller team or a one-man team, then all of the changes in the framework mean that every version you're relearning what you already knew just to keep up to date with the framework. And really, this is what I felt like trying to keep up. And when I thought about things more deeply, I thought, well, why am I having all of this code to help me to do things which should be relatively simple? And I think the JavaScript world as well, when React came out, then we saw that things could be simpler, right? And actually following React led me to something else. So the solution wasn't more buckets to put your code in, and more like this. Just give me one moment. Okay, for some reason my notes aren't showing. Does someone know how to use Keynote? Keynote's also a very big framework. So I didn't plan on a demonstration of what it's like to use a web framework, but there we go. So Elm is wonderful. Elm is a very simple, strongly typed functional programming language for the front end, compiling down to JavaScript. I mean, even if you pull in the additional libraries that you do need to build a web application, it's an order of magnitude smaller than Ember. So Ember was almost 200,000 lines of code, Elm was 10,000 lines of code. And in many ways, it's functional programming in its purest form, right? If you want to learn functional programming, you really can't go wrong with Elm. When you're learning Elm, it's almost as if you're learning general principles and nothing more. So when I was with Ember, it was feeling like I was learning the framework. When I was learning Elm, it felt I was becoming a better and more experienced programmer. And part of the reason for that is it focuses around data types. And we saw that in the last talk, that focusing on data, we don't have objects. You have to boil problems down with data structures. You have to think up front how your problem looks like, what your data type should be in order to solve the problem, and then you're using functions to operate on those data types. And the other thing is, like I said, it's beautiful. There's some Elm. It looks strangely familiar if you squint. It's readable, it's uncomplicated, it's beautiful, it's enjoyable to write. And so I find it interesting. 3 years ago, I came to the Elm Europe conference, and it was Elm attracted in the early days, people who were interested in these things. And I got chatting to someone in the hallway, and we were chatting, and we had a really interesting conversation. And I thought, okay, we don't do Facebook stalking as developers. We go home and then we check out people's GitHubs. And I had been talking with Michelle Martins, one of the organizers of the conference, and this blew me away. This is something I'd just never seen before. I'd been a Rails programmer all of my career. Here we had a web framework in less than 1,000 lines of code, an ORM in less than 1,000 lines of code, state machine implementation in 44 lines of code, a templating library in 37 lines of code, smaller than the template itself, nest, namespace keys. It was beautiful. And one of the things that was consistent in all these libraries was it was focused, it was small, it was using data structures and mapping the problem to data structures. So let's talk about Ruby and the experience. So I went home, I got a job with Club Collect, which I really enjoy. I was given time to do a lot of CAM work, refactoring work, taking a Rails code base and improving upon it. I've got 3 problems I'd like to share with you before I give you my conclusions. And this is also to prove that you don't have to step outside of Rails to do some of this stuff. I'm really interested to hear Jeremy's talk next, where he talks about implementing this in a bigger organization without Rails. So first, templating. This is before. You don't really have to understand the code. I didn't. But this is what I came up with. That's maybe not so fascinating, but when you look at the diff of the pull request, you see that we add 2,000 lines of code and we lose almost 12,000. Simple. And just for the record, this does exactly the same thing. Those lines of code added include tests to test that the templates that were generated are identical to the ones that were generated before. So the benefits, that it's clean, it's simple, it's small, and in my opinion, it's really beautiful. And this was using the Moat templating library. The second is report generation, something we all have to do. You may have seen something like this before, the Nokogiri XML builder style. I don't care much for the builder style, but certainly not when it's done like this. Here we've got a magic constant. Where on earth are these columns coming from? Here in the middle we got some active record queries. And then this is just a mess. Good luck separating the presentation, the ordering, the logic, figuring out what order the columns are in, changing this without breaking anything, right? Instead of this, I was able to come up with something like this, where you've just simply got an HTML table that you generate. You can convert that easily to XML. And really, the key here was to separate out the data structure, to think about the report in terms of the data structures, just like I'd learned with Elm. And so we have an export, and it has a simple set of headers, and the report is actually an array of headers with a row of data, and you're just mapping through an active record collection and wrapping the active record object in a decorator and presenter, separating out the concerns, thinking outside the box, coming up with something that fits the solution. And if I can try and visualize that in my very bad drawing, we've simply got an array of headers, and we've got an array of rows, and we're not thinking in this really dark and obscure XML builder where everything's just mixed together. The benefits, the concerns are neatly separated. It's straightforward to understand. It's clear where to change what. It's easy to extend and easy to test. After I shipped this, my coworkers switched all of the reporting to this style. We extracted the reports to a YAML file, which we could then edit, and in the future we could even give customers the opportunity to put their own reports together because of the flexibility that's inherent in this solution. And the third example is the message attributes. So we send a lot of emails and SMSs and things to people for invoices at Club Collect. And we have to have a lot of messages. These messages are themed, etc. There's a load of stuff that needs to go into a message. This was repeated again and again for every message. So what did I do? I shipped out a message attributes class so that everything is neatly contained. I used the benefits of object-oriented programming with the functional benefits of focusing on data structures. and we arrive at something like this, where you're literally just merging a set of nested hashes. That you don't really need to think any more about what the problem is. Again, the concerns are neatly separated, straightforward to understand, clear to where to change what, easy to extend, easy to test. So I want to thank Michel for opening my eyes to Ruby in its beauty, in its purest form. I want to thank Mats for coming up with a language which gives us joy. You know, thanks, Mats, not for brainwashing us, but actually for washing our brains, guiding... guiding us to think in terms of freedom and joy, giving us the opportunity to create and doing it for fun. You know, ultimate freedom is to be unconstrained. You know, there are people who have vision, who can think for themselves, who appreciate beauty, who appreciate elegance, who strive for simplicity. And I'm not talking about Mats or Michel or any of the other speakers at the conference. I'm talking about you. Put the vegetable chopper away. Take out the chef's knife. And do it for fun. Step outside the prison of programming and preconceived patterns. Carry confidence to conceive code with curiosity and creativity. Reignite the rudimentary reasons you responded to Ruby. Reduce your readiness to repeat the routine. And instead ignite the imagination to iterate towards the ideal. Scrutinize the standard with suspicion and strive to spot solutions of simplicity. Come with me and rediscover Ruby. Thank you.
Do you want questions?
Sure.
Any questions?
Hi, I was checking Elm recently actually, and it was a bit hard to get started and finding proper resources to learn. What would be your advice to get started as fast as we can and ship stuff?
Yeah, certainly. So I said Elm was very simple. I don't think that necessarily means it's easy, especially at the start if you haven't been exposed to functional programming. I actually had the same experience as you, where you think, okay, it's beautiful, it's simple, but how on earth do you use it? So I followed the first half of a course on programming languages by Dan Grossman, who goes into ML, and that gave me a foundation in functional programming. I don't expect everyone to go and do that. The best way is to play around yourself. The Elm architecture tutorial, and I'm a big fan of Richard Feldman, who does, I think he's got a course or a couple of courses, and he's also got a book which is almost ready to be printed, I believe, and I'd recommend those resources. And with the caveat also that because Elm wants to be predictable and safe, it means that when you're using it along with the rest of the JavaScript ecosystem, it sometimes requires a little bit of extra work to accomplish some of the things that may be very easy to do with raw JavaScript. Yeah.
And how much time do you... So what you are saying is that you learn Elm and then you do not use it in... Well, maybe use it on another project, but you can use what you learn in Elm in your actual production project. And how much time do you think someone has to dedicate to learn Elm if he takes... yes, how much time did you take?
So I can answer for myself. Obviously, everyone's different. And there's also a limitation to how much time some people can spend learning. I'd taken a couple of months off work, and I think around 2 months to get to a point where I could do simple things with Elm. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to tell you that actually learning Elm is not about Elm. It's about learning how to program, and it's not. So learning Elm is not the only goal. The goal is to to change the way you think, and it helps because I think like 5 years ago I wouldn't have understood what was your point in your talk, and now I understand, and it feels so right and true. So yeah.
What is something you disliked about Elm, if anything?
So I think the rigidity means when you're putting it in the real world, in a business context, that you struggle sometimes to try and figure out how to do it. So interaction with JavaScript, what's the best way to approach a problem? Yeah. And again, these things are trade-offs, right? Because the rigidity is also one of the major benefits. That when you put code in production, you're like, it's safe, it's good. If it compiles, it works.
And it never breaks.
So do you use just pure Elm to write your front-end code, or is this something on top of it to help your life? To ship
Yeah,
things?
sure. So at Club Collect, we don't use Elm, and that's not because we don't like Elm. It's simply because we do very little front-end JavaScript code. We're almost purely server-based with very little, I think, jQuery even. I'm ashamed to say that, but yeah. So in terms of my personal journey, it was something that helped me to better understand how to do Ruby without the helpings of a framework. Yeah. Mm.
It helps to become independent of things, gems, things. Other questions?
Hi, great talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
You talked about certain functional aspects that you carried over to Ruby, like focusing on the data and data structures. Are there any other parts of Elm and functional programming that inspired your Ruby code?
Yeah, so data structures was definitely the big one, and it's related to data structures, what I'm about to say. That is that with Rails, I would just dive in, and I would figure things out along the way. After learning Elm, I stop and think, try to understand the problem, try to see the shapes, and then after that come up with a solution. And often what that involves in practice is introducing like another layer of abstraction which fits the problem, rather than trying to squeeze the problem into the layers of abstraction that you have.
Thank you.
One last question. I think we are done. So thank you, Philip.
Thank you.